Shadows in the Canals MI6 operations in Old Europe. If you are watching this from anywhere in the world, tell me in the comments where you are, because today we begin a story hidden in the shadows of Europe, whispered only among those who have walked the secret canals of Venice and the fogged streets of old cities where MI6 has operated unseen. This is Spy Ward's story, and if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to do so, because what you are about to hear is one of the most carefully concealed operations in the agency's history. A mission so silent that even the names of those involved are often forgotten. Jonathan Reed, a young field analyst newly assigned to MI6's European desk, stood at the edge of a narrow Venetian canal, the water black as ink beneath a moonless sky. In his hands, carefully folded and almost brittle with age, was a map like none he had ever seen. No compass rose, no city names, no familiar landmarks, only a twisting blue line winding unpredictably across empty parchment. The archivist who had delivered it before his sudden death had whispered, "Follow the water. Trust the line. It knows more than we do." Jonathan folded the map inside his coat and glanced at the gondolier, a silent man who had been instructed never to speak. They drifted through the canals, passing under bridges carved with faces that had stared down centuries of secrets. The stillness of the night pressed in on him, and he realized immediately that this mission was unlike anything he had trained for. The map pulsed faintly in his pocket, warming his fingers, almost alive, reacting to something beyond the visible. A single movement in the water made him glance up a shadow on the bridge above, a figure barely discernible, watching, not approaching, not speaking, just observing. Jonathan's heart tightened. Every instinct told him to react, yet he knew instinct would betray him in this place. The archivist's final words echoed in his mind. The map is not what it seems. It chooses who follows. He adjusted the map and noticed for the first time that the blue line subtly shifted, responding to his orientation. It was as if the water, the streets, and the moonless sky had conspired to form a network of invisible signals, guiding the steps of those who dared to read it. The gondolier steered them silently toward a stone bridge partially obscured by fog. Jonathan carefully unfolded a corner of the map. A faint shimmer appeared where the blue line touched a canal bend. His pulse quickened. The shimmer intensified as if acknowledging his attention. He realized the map was not static, it was alive with data, patterns, signals that extended beyond the immediate geography. A sudden ripple across the water made him look up. On the bridge, the shadow had shifted slightly, a gesture almost imperceptible. Jonathan understood immediately. The observer was not human in the conventional sense, or at least not acting within normal parameters. His very presence was a signal, a key, a message. The gondolier did not speak, but the boat glided smoothly, as though guided by forces Jonathan could not see. They reached the bend, and Jonathan could hear the faintest vibration through the wooden floor of the gondola. It pulsed in rhythm with the map, a coded heartbeat that made the hairs on his neck rise. He held the map closer, watching the line rearrange itself. Then, a flicker, a tiny symbol etched along the line, previously invisible. Letters, numbers. Impossible to tell, yet the sensation was undeniable. The canal itself seemed to echo it. Jonathan realized the water was more than water. It was a medium, a transmitter, a living archive of movement and signal. He remembered a story from training how MI6 once used the canals to send invisible messages, tapping the resonance of water to transmit intelligence across cities without detection. That knowledge had seemed abstract, theoretical. Now it was visceral, undeniable, and frightening. Another movement above. The shadow leaned forward slightly. Jonathan did not breathe. He did not move. He simply watched, letting the map dictate the rhythm of the boat. The shimmer on the map intensified, forming a cluster of lines that converged on one point. He traced it mentally and realized it indicated a location within walking distance, an abandoned warehouse. The archivist had said, forgotten by all but those who still knew the old ways. Jonathan folded the map again, pressing it to his chest. Every instinct screamed caution, every cell in his body aware that this was no ordinary mission. And as they approached the designated bend, the shadow vanished. Nothing moved above, yet Jonathan could feel the presence had not left. The map pulsed warmer. The blue line pointed forward. The gondolier adjusted the oar, taking them into narrower, darker channels where the walls of the city leaned close enough to touch. Shadows danced along the water like living entities, and Jonathan realized that the map responded not only to location, but to proximity, danger, and awareness. Every step required precision. Every breath measured. Then a subtle sound of footstep on stone. Distant, soft, deliberate echoed across the canal. Jonathan froze. It was too rhythmic, too controlled, too intentional. Not an ordinary passerby, not a stray animal. Something or someone was moving along the edge of the city, attuned to the map, reacting to its pulse. He swallowed hard and whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning." The gondolier nodded ever so slightly, and they continued deeper into the labyrinth of Venices. Canals guided by a map with no north of pulse they could almost hear, and the faint, unseen eyes of an observer who had been waiting for them across time and shadows. The city exhaled around them, carrying secrets older than memory. And Jonathan understood that the night ahead would test every lesson he had ever learned, every skill he possessed, and every ounce of courage he could summon. The map led them onward, and with each twist, each hidden passage, each silent canal, Jonathan felt himself stepping further into a world where nothing was what it seemed, and where the line on the map was less a direction, and more a language, one that only those willing to listen with eyes, hands, and instinct could ever hope to understand. Jonathan pressed the map against his chest as the gondola glided silently beneath the bridges. The black water reflecting fragments of lantern light like shattered glass. And if you're watching this story from anywhere tonight, tell us where in the comments, because this is the chapter MI6 never wanted revealed. A chapter where footsteps on water could speak louder than 1,000 voices, and every shadow held a truth so delicate that even the trained eye might miss it. The city around him seemed to bend and twist, every canal a potential trap, every arch a gate into another layer of secrecy that only a select few had ever navigated. He could hear nothing but the gentle slap of the oar against water and the subtle vibration in the map. A signal reacting to every motion, guiding him through passages long abandoned and forgotten. Ahead, a faint ripple broke the glassy surface of the canal, as if someone or something had stepped lightly upon it. Jonathan froze, hand tightening around the compass-like device he had retrieved the night before. The gondolier, silent as ever, glanced at him with eyes that spoke volumes, and together they drifted toward the disturbance. The water pulsed again, subtle at first, then like a heartbeat echoing beneath the city. And Jonathan realized that the footsteps were not illusions, they were signals encoded in motion, traveling through water in a language older than any map, any code, any operative's instruction. Every step he took in the gondola resonated with those hidden rhythms, and he understood instinctively that one wrong movement could erase their trail or summon attention they did not want. The map pulsed hotter, responding to the water's vibration. Lines shifted and converged into a pattern, pointing to an unmarked dock ahead, shrouded in fog and history. Jonathan's eyes adjusted to the dim light, noticing a faint shimmer beneath the surface, a distortion in the reflection of the old warehouses lining the canal. Someone was waiting, and the canal itself seemed to acknowledge their presence, whispering through currents only he could perceive. He breathed slowly, listening not with his ears, but with his instincts. The footsteps grew louder, not above the water, but within it, translating into a code he could feel rather than hear. Jonathan leaned forward, adjusting the compass device, which glowed in tandem with the pulses, projecting faint lines onto the map that merged with the canals around him. The gondolier steered closer to the dock, careful to avoid disturbing the water's surface, and the ripples intensified in response. Jonathan realized with a chill that the footsteps belonged to someone trained to use the city itself as a medium. An operative who could communicate invisibly, sending warnings, instructions, or signals through nothing but motion and the water's subtle language. A dark figure emerged from the mist on the dock, moving with deliberate, silent steps, almost floating above the water. Jonathan recognized the posture from archival photographs of legendary MI6 agents, the precision. The silence, the deliberate gestures that conveyed far more than words ever could. The figure halted, and Jonathan knew that any wrong blink, any casual motion, could betray him. He mimicked the rhythm of the water, matching pulse with pulse, step with step, and the figure paused, as if acknowledging his awareness. The gondolier kept the boat steady, each stroke measured, while Jonathan unfolded the map slightly to confirm the pattern. The blue lines on the parchment aligned perfectly with the canal currents, highlighting a hidden path beneath the warehouses where secret meetings had occurred decades earlier, and where intelligence had been passed through shadows rather than conversation. Jonathan felt the weight of centuries in that moment, the careful choreography of spies, the silent transmission of knowledge, the lives saved or lost by an understanding that did not rely on spoken words. He traced a line on the map, feeling it pulse beneath his fingertips like a living organism. And the footsteps on the water responded instantly, adjusting rhythm, speed, and position to maintain harmony. It was a silent dialogue, a test of comprehension, of perception, of courage. A sudden vibration surged through the compass device, stronger than before, and Jonathan realized it was a signal to act. The figure on the dock lifted an arm, tracing an arc over the water, pointing toward a narrow stairwell concealed behind an old warehouse. Jonathan nodded ever so slightly, acknowledging the instruction, and the gondolier steered toward it. The water beneath them shifted as if granting passage, and Jonathan felt the pulse of the canal intensify, reverberating against walls, under bridges, and through centuries of stone. Each step brought them closer to a chamber hidden below the city, a place where messages had been stored, signals intercepted, and agents passed through unnoticed for decades. The footsteps were no longer just a warning. They were a guide, marking the path forward, testing Jonathan's ability to synchronize thought, movement, and perception with the unseen intelligence flowing beneath the city. He knew instinctively that he had passed the first trial. The silent observer, or whoever controlled the rhythm of the canals, had accepted him as a participant in the secret language of water. And yet, the pulse persisted, growing more complex, more insistent, as if the canals themselves were alive, reshaping their architecture to conceal even further secrets, challenging him to follow, to interpret, to survive. Jonathan took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "I understand now. The city is speaking. I must learn to listen with my hands, my eyes, my body." The gondolier nodded again, and together they moved through the mist, guided by footsteps on the water, toward an encounter that promised revelation, danger, and the kind of intelligence the world above would never imagine existed. Every ripple, every echo, every invisible signal told a story, and Jonathan was determined to hear it fully. The canals waited silently, as if holding their breath, ready to reveal the next piece of a puzzle that had been in motion for decades, unseen, unheard, and unrecorded. Jonathan adjusted the map under his coat as the gondola slid through a narrow channel, the mist curling around the old stone buildings like smoke from centuries past. If you're watching this story from anywhere tonight, drop a comment telling us where you are, because what Jonathan was about to witness was the kind of operation that MI6 never recorded publicly, a mission where the line between reality and illusion was as fragile as the fog drifting over the water. The informant had given him a meeting point, an abandoned warehouse on the far edge of the Venetian canals. But when Jonathan arrived, the place was empty, not a single sign of life. Only the faint echo of footsteps that didn't belong to anyone he could see. The map pulsed again in his hand, warmer now, almost urgent, responding to some hidden signal he could neither name nor locate. Jonathan felt a prickle on the back of his neck. This was no ordinary disappearance. The informant had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of tobacco and the faintest disturbance in the water's surface. Every instinct screamed that this was a test. One of those trials MI6 designed to measure an operative's ability to read patterns in chaos. The gondolier steered silently to the dock, the boat scraping gently against the wooden posts as if urging Jonathan forward. He stepped onto the wet stones and followed the faint vibrations in the map, each pulse guiding him closer to the informant or the message they had left behind. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and cavernous, windows like blind eyes staring into the fog. Jonathan moved cautiously, sensing every shift in shadow, every ripple of water against the walls. Then, as he reached the main door, a subtle flicker of light caught his eye brief, almost imperceptible, reflecting off a broken pane. He approached slowly and noticed a series of symbols scrawled lightly on the stone floor, arranged in a pattern that matched the shifting lines on his map. The informant had left instructions without leaving instructions, code written in shadow and reflection, a message only visible to those attuned to the rhythms of the city's canals. Jonathan followed the path, each step measured, his eyes scanning for anything out of place. The fog thickened, curling around his shoulders, whispering in echoes of sound that weren't really sound. He realized that the informant's disappearance wasn't random, it was orchestrated to test his perception, his patience, and his ability to interpret subtle signals. A faint movement in the upper windows caught his attention. He froze, listening. There was nothing but the water, still and black. Yet the vibrations in the map grew more insistent, pulsing in tandem with a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Jonathan understood that he was being guided through the building by some unseen presence, each pulse marking where he could step safely, where he needed to pause, where the next clue awaited. He descended a narrow staircase hidden behind a crumbling wall, the steps slick with water and age. At the bottom, he found a small chamber, empty except for a single desk and a chair facing the wall. On the desk lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed, edges damp from the canal's moisture. He unfolded it carefully. The symbols inside matched those he had seen on the floor above, but arranged differently, forming a complex map within a map, a network of hidden routes, safe houses, and dead drops. Every line, every dot was deliberate. A signature of someone who could disappear into the shadows and leave the entire city blind to their presence. Jonathan realized the informant had vanished intentionally, becoming invisible not through magic, but through precision, preparation, and an intimate knowledge of Venice's waterways and hidden chambers. The map in his hand pulsed once more, almost in approval, confirming the alignment of symbols and waterways, guiding him to the next location, to the next stage of an operation that existed entirely in the invisible space between memory, signal, and motion. He stepped out into the corridor, feeling the building itself breathe around him, as if acknowledging his progress. Every whisper of air, every ripple of water against stone, spoke in the language the informant had left behind, and Jonathan began to understand that disappearance was not absence, it was communication. Moving further, he noticed faint scratches on the wall, markers of direction for someone trained to see what others could not. Each marker synchronized with the map's pulses, forming a chain of invisible steps leading toward the next rendezvous. Jonathan knew that misreading even one sign could erase him from the network entirely, or worse, compromise the operation. Outside, the fog had thickened into an almost tangible wall. Yet the lines on the map cut through it with perfect clarity, guiding him through the maze of alleys and canals to another abandoned dock, the final point the informant had left. He stopped, listening. The water shimmered faintly, reflecting a distorted moonlight, and for the first time Jonathan understood the brilliance of the informant's technique. They had communicated, navigated, and tested without ever uttering a word, leaving behind a trail of signals only the attentive, the patient, and the perceptive could follow. And as Jonathan prepared to step into the next boat that would carry him deeper into the operation, he realized that in this world of shadows, disappearance was the ultimate form of presence. And the informant, unseen and unheard, had already delivered the most important lesson. That intelligence was not in words, but in understanding the spaces between them, in reading the silent cues that could change the course of everything. Jonathan stepped off the gondola into a narrow alley lined with crumbling brick and flickering lanterns, the mist curling like ghostly fingers around his boots. If you are following this story from anywhere tonight, comment below where you are watching from. Because tonight, the shadows lead us into a place where deception wears two faces, where every door hides a secret, and every corridor is a test of perception. A test only the trained eye of MI6 could hope to survive. The hotel before him looked ordinary at first glance, a modest facade with peeling paint and a sign that swayed silently in the cold evening breeze. Yet, Jonathan had been briefed that appearances were deliberate illusions. From decades of MI6 operations, he knew that the most dangerous places were often the least conspicuous. He adjusted the map in his hand. Its blue lines shimmered faintly, pointing toward a side entrance partially hidden behind a rusted iron gate. Jonathan approached quietly, every step measured, listening to the faint echoes bouncing off the stone walls. Inside, the lobby was dimly lit, furnished with antique chairs and a reception desk that seemed abandoned, though the soft ticking of a clock suggested otherwise. A chandelier swayed slightly above, casting fragmented shadows across the patterned carpet. Jonathan noted a faint draft from a corridor to the left, a movement of air that didn't match the ventilation system something had passed through recently. A receptionist materialized from the shadows, an older woman with sharp eyes that flicked over him as if measuring his intentions. "Room 17, she said, voice neutral, handing him a key without a smile. Jonathan took it and nodded, knowing that this gesture was deliberate. The hotel itself was a maze, a living test designed to conceal the movements of spies, informants, and unwitting intruders alike. As he ascended the narrow staircase to the second floor, the map pulsed with urgency. Blue lines overlaid the hotel's floor plan, highlighting walls that were not walls, doors that were false, and passages that existed only in shadows. The heartbeat-like vibration beneath his fingertips grew stronger with each step, syncing with his pulse as though guiding him. Room 17 was unremarkable, a small chamber with faded wallpaper and a single window overlooking the canal. Jonathan placed the key on the desk and unfolded the map. The lines now converged inside the room, forming a pattern he had seen only once before. During archival training simulations, 2 points, 2 paths, 2 faces of the same building, indicating dual functions operating simultaneously. He realized the hotel's double nature. Above, a facade of ordinary lodging. Below, a network of hidden rooms, secret meeting spaces, and surveillance stations. The chandelier above flickered, and in the shadows, he thought he saw movement of figure mirrored perfectly by the reflection in the window. Yet, when he turned, no one stood there. A shiver ran down his spine. The hotel had 2 faces, literally and metaphorically. One to distract, one to conceal, and the second face revealed itself only to those who could interpret the subtle signals, the imperceptible vibrations, and the silent cues scattered throughout the building. Jonathan pressed forward, following the map and the barely perceptible hum in his palm. A hidden latch under the wardrobe clicked softly, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. He gripped the railing, each step careful, feeling the floorboards resonate with signals from beneath the city. At the bottom, a series of interconnected chambers opened before him, lined with filing cabinets, secure communications equipment, and observation points. Here, MI6 operatives had monitored contacts, intercepted messages, and coordinated covert operations across old Europe, all while appearing to the outside world as just another anonymous hotel. The faintest sound, a tap, a shift in shadow, alerted Jonathan to someone else in the room. He froze. A man stepped from behind a partition, face obscured, movements precise and deliberate. Not a threat, but a test. Jonathan mirrored his posture, following the silent choreography of spies who had walked these corridors before him. A message was embedded in the positioning of objects, the angle of light, the flicker of reflection. Jonathan deciphered the instructions in real time. A safe route to the next rendezvous, a hidden cache of intelligence waiting beyond the walls. A continuation of the mission that would carry him further into the labyrinth of secrecy. The hotel, with its two faces, had revealed a lesson. Observation, patience, and subtlety mattered more than force or speed. Every element, from the chandeliers to the cracks in the wallpaper, is deliberately arranged to communicate to those who could see and remain invisible to those who could not. Jonathan exhaled slowly, understanding that this was MI6's world, a realm where deception was layered. Reality was mutable, and the line between safety and exposure was a thin one, guided by signals few could interpret. As he ascended the hidden staircase back to the second floor, the chandelier's reflection flickered once more, and he realized that each light, shadow, and mirrored image was a part of a greater intelligence network, a living lesson in espionage. The hotel had two faces, but Jonathan now carried the insight to navigate both, to see the signals hidden in plain sight, and to follow the path laid out for him by those who had vanished into shadows decades ago. The night stretched on, canals whispered outside the windows, and Jonathan knew that his journey was far from over. Each room, each corridor, each step carried him deeper into a city alive with secrets. A city that taught that sometimes the greatest intelligence is found not in what is said, but in what remains unseen. Jonathan emerged from the hotel's hidden passages into the mist-laden streets of Venice. The fog, thick and almost tangible, curling around the lanterns and reflecting off the rippling canals, as if the city itself were breathing. If you're watching this story tonight, comment where you're seeing it from. Because tonight's chapter takes us into a layer of espionage so intricate that even the city's waters seemed to conceal intelligence within every wave, and every foggy gust could hide messages meant only for those trained to decode them. The map in his hand pulsed gently, the faint blue lines glowing in response to the subtle vibrations of the mist. Jonathan knew that the cipher he was seeking was not in ink or paper, but in movement. Reflection and shadow and intelligence embedded in the very atmosphere around him. Footsteps echoed softly on the cobblestones, but Jonathan understood instantly that they were not random. They were signals, patterns designed to convey information without words. He adjusted his pace to match the rhythm, each step a measured response to the silent communication flowing through the streets. As he rounded a narrow bridge, the mist thickened, obscuring everything beyond a few feet, and Jonathan realized that the cipher was layered, a code, hidden in plain sight, yet invisible to any who did not know where or how to look. A gondola drifted silently beneath him, its oars moving with an almost deliberate cadence. And he saw a faint shimmer in the water, a reflection that did not match the surrounding architecture. The shimmer pulsed in subtle intervals, forming a sequence of symbols that only someone attentive to the hidden rhythm could interpret. Jonathan leaned closer, tracing the reflection with his eyes, and the pattern began to resolve itself, revealing a map overlay of the canals, pinpointing secret routes and drop points used for intelligence exchanges over decades. The fog shifted again, and with it came a whisper of motion. Almost imperceptible, a hand lifted a signal lantern in the distance, then lowered it slowly. Jonathan recognized the gesture instantly, a cipher element indicating the next step, the next chamber in the network of operations MI6 had maintained beneath the city for decades. He followed the instructions embedded in movement and mist, each line of the invisible code leading him closer to a small, unmarked warehouse at the edge of the canal. The mist swirled around the entrance, masking a subtle marker etched into the stone teeny grooves that aligned perfectly with the pulsing lines on Jonathan's map. He pressed the map against the stone, feeling a vibration sync with the grooves, and a small panel in the wall clicked open, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. Jonathan entered cautiously, aware that every step could trigger an alarm, though none would sound outwardly. The passage led him into a chamber lit only by faint phosphorescent markers embedded in the floor. On a pedestal in the center rested a metallic cylinder etched with complex geometrical patterns that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle. This was the cipher hidden in the mist, the key to a network of intelligence that operated in shadows, connecting agents across Europe without ever leaving a trace of communication above ground. Jonathan studied the cylinder, tracing the symbols with gloved fingers. Each pattern corresponded to an operative, a location, a signal previously intercepted by MI6. And it was designed so that even if discovered, the cipher could not be understood without the layered context embedded in the canals, the mist, and the silent movement of the city. He began recording the patterns, committing sequences to memory, aware that a single error could compromise months of preparation, perhaps years of intelligence. Work. The chamber itself seemed alive, humming softly with the resonance of past operations, echoing faintly the footsteps of agents long gone. Jonathan realized that the cipher was more than a code, was a living system, continuously adapting to new intelligence, to the rhythms of the canals, and to the movement of those who would attempt to interpret it. As he completed his observation, a subtle vibration in the mist outside warned him. Someone else was near, testing his vigilance, his comprehension, and his discretion. Jonathan froze, aligning himself with the shadows, breathing lightly and letting the mist and cipher guide him. A figure emerged from the haze, face obscured, moving silently along the canal. Jonathan followed the movements, translating them into instructions, each gesture, each shift a part of the complex network of signals that MI6 had created to operate unseen for decades. The night thickened, fog swirling around them like smoke from an ancient fire. And Jonathan understood fully that the cipher hidden in the mist was not simply a tool for communication. It was a test, a lesson in perception, patience, and the quiet discipline of espionage, where a single misstep could erase decades of careful work. He whispered to himself, "Every movement matters. Every shadow counts. Every ripple speaks." And as he stepped toward the canal-side exit, ready to continue the operation, Jonathan realized that he had not just uncovered a code. He had become part of it, moving through the mist, translating its language, and walking the delicate line between visibility and disappearance that defined MI6's operations in old Europe. Jonathan moved cautiously along the fog-draped canal, the water black and still as ink, reflecting only the faint glimmer of lanterns overhead. If you're watching this story right now, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Subscribe for more secret operations. And stay tuned tonight, you're about to witness an MI6 mission that the public has never officially seen. The city seemed suspended in time. No gulls cried, no gondolas stirred the water, and even the soft whispers of the mist felt muted, as if the canals themselves were holding their breath. Jonathan's map pulsed lightly, syncing with the rhythm of the hidden intelligence network, indicating a final checkpoint along the labyrinthine waterways. Every step he took was measured, calibrated, deliberate, because the silence itself was a test, a warning that one wrong move could erase the trail entirely. As he approached a narrow archway leading to a hidden dock, he sensed movement upstream, shadows slipping along the canal walls, silent as smoke. He adjusted his path, letting intuition guide him, knowing that MI6 operatives before him had mastered the art of navigating danger through perception, pattern recognition, and subtle signals rather than brute force. The faint vibrations in the map intensified as he drew closer to the rendezvous point, revealing hidden symbols that aligned with etched markers beneath the water's surface, imperceptible to anyone not trained to see them. Jonathan finally reached the dock, where an unassuming rowboat floated, tethered to a post as if waiting only for him. The last signal from the cipher hidden in the mist confirmed the alignment. This was the point where the operation's secret network converged, where intelligence was exchanged, and where the city's countless unseen agents had coordinated for decades. He climbed into the boat, every movement synchronized with the pulsing rhythm that guided him. And as the gondolier operative, whose face remained obscured, pushed off into the canal, the water seemed to absorb their presence, swallowing their journey into silence. It was then that Jonathan understood why this night was called the night the canals went silent. The waterways, which had carried Whisper's footsteps and signals for decades, now paused, as if honoring the delicate choreography of shadows, ensuring that the mission could complete undisturbed. He glanced at the mist curling over the water, each wisp a carrier of secrets, and realized that MI6's operations were not just about gathering intelligence. They were about preserving the invisible, operating in spaces where perception mattered more than visibility, and understanding that the city itself was both participant and observer. In the distance, faint reflections of past agents flickered in the water, echoes of missions long concluded, but their presence lingered like a memory embedded in the canals, teaching the new generation the silent language of espionage. Jonathan felt the weight of every step, every signal, every carefully placed marker that had come before him, and understood that intelligence was a living network, carried not in documents or recordings alone, but in the careful interpretation of movement, mist, shadow, and silence. As the boat glided deeper into the labyrinth of waterways, the pulsations of the map slowed, acknowledging completion, and Jonathan exhaled, sensing the first measure of safety, knowing that the city had allowed him passage, that the signals had been read correctly, and that the canal's silence had witnessed the continuation of MI6's legacy. He looked back at the faint outlines of the buildings, the still water, and the mist curling around them, realizing that he had experienced a lesson in intelligence far beyond textbooks, that secrecy was an art, patience a weapon, and silence a tool more powerful than any code. "Remember," he whispered, almost to himself, "the shadows carry more than whispers. They carry history, strategy, and truth." As the gondola disappeared into the fog, a final voiceover addressed the audience. "This has been another journey into the shadows of MI6 operations in old Europe." If you enjoyed following Jonathan's mission, comment below where you're watching from, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story from the hidden world of espionage. Remember, the events you've seen are based on historical techniques and operations, but some characters and sequences have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes to ensure a safe and engaging experience.